Bayo was a man who had it all. He was a billionaire with the world at his feet. His mansion in the heart of the city was beyond anything one could dream of. It had 12 rooms, each furnished with expensive pieces of art and furniture from around the world. His business empire stretched across countries, and he was respected and admired by many. But despite all his wealth, Bayo had always been a lonely man. He had married Amina, his wife, 3 years ago. Amina was kind, loving, and gentle. She had come from a modest background, and when they first met, Bayo had been drawn to her warmth and humility. She wasn't like the other women he had known who were only interested in his wealth. Amina had shown him the kind of love he never thought he deserved, and they had built a life together. However, as the years went by, things started to change. Bayo was busy with his work, and Amina began to feel neglected. She spent most of her time in the mansion, reading books or tending to small matters, and though Bayo cared for her deeply, the spark they once had seemed to fade. They no longer shared the deep conversations or the laughter that had once filled their home. Then, one day, a new maid was hired. Her name was Tigga. She was young, beautiful, and seemed eager to please. She was introduced to Bayo by his assistant, and at first, he didn't pay her much attention. She was just another employee. But as time passed, something started to change. Tigga had a way about her that made people feel comfortable. She was polite, respectful, and quick to help with anything that was asked of her. She worked hard, always with a smile on her face. And for Bayo, there was something oddly captivating about her presence. It was hard to explain, but whenever she entered the room, his heart seemed to skip a beat. One evening, after a long day at the office, Bayo returned home earlier than usual. Amina wasn't in the living room, so he decided to go to his study to unwind. As he passed by the kitchen, he saw Tigga, the maid, preparing dinner. She was standing by the counter, chopping vegetables. Her back was turned to him, and Bayo could see the curves of her body through her maid uniform. His eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than they should have. Tigga turned around and caught his gaze, but instead of looking away or feeling embarrassed, she smiled at him. It was a friendly smile, but to Bayo, it felt like something more. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it made him feel uneasy. He quickly averted his eyes and walked past her, heading to his study. That night, Bayo couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to fall asleep. He thought about Tigga and how her presence seemed to have an effect on him that he didn't fully understand. He told himself it was nothing, that it was just a fleeting attraction. But as the days passed, he began to notice more things about her. She was always polite, always present, and always around when he needed her. It was during one of these late nights when Bayo was working in his office that the most shocking thing happened. Tigga entered the study to ask if he needed anything. Her hair was tied up in a neat bun, and she was wearing a simple dress instead of her maid uniform. The sight of her caught him off guard, and he felt his heart race. She looked different, more than just the maid. She looked like a woman. "Do you need anything, sir?" Tigga asked, her voice soft and gentle. Bayo was still staring at her, completely frozen. His heart was pounding, and his thoughts were racing. It was then that he realized his body was reacting to her in a way that he had never experienced before. He tried to speak but couldn't find his voice. His mind was clouded, and he didn't know what to say. Tigga noticed his silence and took a small step forward, her gaze holding his. She was so close that Bayo could feel the warmth of her presence. "Is everything all right, sir?" Tigga asked again, but this time her tone was different. It was softer, almost teasing. Bayo's breath caught in his throat. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he tried to push the thoughts from his mind. He was a married man. He loved Amina. Yet, here he was, staring at his maid, who had somehow awakened a desire inside of him that he couldn't explain. The room felt suddenly too small, the air too thick. Tigga stood there, looking at him with an unreadable expression. Bayo swallowed hard and looked away, trying to compose himself. But as he did, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. There was a brief flash of a smile on Tigga's lips. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. It was as though she knew exactly what was going on in his mind. And for the first time in a long while, Bayo felt something stir inside of him that he couldn't control. He quickly stood up, trying to clear his head. "I think that will be all for tonight, Tigga," he said, his voice a little shaky. He couldn't believe what had just happened. He had never felt this way before, especially not about someone like Tigga. Tigga nodded and turned to leave, but just before she stepped out of the door, she paused and looked back at him. "Good night, sir," she said, her voice almost a whisper, and with that she was gone. Bayo stood in the study, his mind racing. He couldn't believe what had just occurred. His heart was still beating fast, and his body felt warm. What was happening to him? He knew that he should have felt guilty. He was married, after all. But somehow, the thought of Tigga lingered in his mind, and the desire he felt for her was undeniable. That night, Bayo lay awake in his bed, unable to sleep. His mind kept going back to Tigga, her smile, her presence. He had never felt so conflicted in his life. He knew that this was dangerous, that this could ruin everything. But the attraction he felt for her was so strong, and it was something he couldn't ignore. As he lay there, struggling with his thoughts, Bayo heard a noise coming from outside his room. He turned his head, straining to listen. It was the sound of footsteps. Someone was walking down the hallway. Bayo's heart raced as he wondered who it could be. His mind immediately went to Tigga, and a part of him hoped that it was her. But who could it be at this hour? The footsteps grew louder, and just as Bayo was about to sit up, the door to his room creaked open. He froze, not knowing what to expect next. Bayo's heart was pounding as the door to his bedroom slowly creaked open. He was frozen, unsure of what to expect. He had been lost in his thoughts, trying to make sense of what had just happened with Tigga, and now someone was standing at the threshold of his room. The footsteps had stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. Bayo strained his ears, trying to make out who it was. Was it Amina? Was it Tigga? His mind raced, torn between guilt and a strange curiosity about what was happening. Then, the door opened fully, and Bayo's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't Amina, nor was it Tigga. Standing in the doorway was none other than his assistant, Chitsi. Chitsi, who had worked with Bayo for years, was always reliable and punctual. He was a man in his late 20s, tall and fit, with a calm demeanor that made him a trusted ally. But tonight, as he stood in the doorway, something was off. His usual composed expression was replaced by a look of concern. "Sir, I'm sorry to disturb you," Chitsi said, his voice low and respectful. "But I need to talk to you about something urgent." Bayo, still slightly shaken from his earlier interaction with Tigga, sat up in bed, trying to regain his composure. "Chitsi, what's the matter?" "It's late," Bayo replied, his voice hoarse from the tension that still lingered in his body. Chitsi stepped into the room and closed the door quietly behind him. "It's about Tigga," he said, his eyes flickering with hesitation. "There's something you need to know." Bayo's mind immediately went back to the earlier interaction with Tigga, the way she had looked at him, the way her presence had stirred something inside of him. Was there something he hadn't seen? Was there something going on that he wasn't aware of? His pulse quickened. "What's going on with her?" Bayo asked, his voice tight. Chitsi hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I've been getting reports, sir. Strange behavior from her. I didn't want to alarm you, but it's becoming hard to ignore." Bayo frowned. "What kind of behavior are you talking about?" Chitsi looked around the room, as if making sure no one else was listening, before leaning in closer. "She's been spending time with some of the other staff, and I've overheard some conversations. I don't want to say too much, but there are rumors, sir. She might be involved in something that could jeopardize your business." Bayo's heart skipped a beat. His first instinct was to brush it off. Tigga was just the maid, after all. But the way Chitsi was speaking, the look in his eyes, it made Bayo wonder. Could there really be something more to Tigga than he realized? "Is this about the way she's been acting around me?" Bayo asked, his voice sharp. "You think she's trying to manipulate me?" Chitsi nodded slowly. "It's possible. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I've been noticing some odd things. She's too friendly with the staff, and I've seen her trying to get close to you, sir. Bayo stood up from the bed, the weight of the conversation pressing down on him. The more he thought about it, the more he couldn't ignore the signs. The way Tigga had smiled at him that night in the study, the way she had looked at him with something more than just politeness. Was she trying to get close to him for her own reasons? "I'll handle this," Bayo said, his voice firm. "But I want you to keep an eye on her, Chitsi. Let me know if anything else unusual happens." Chitsi nodded and turned to leave, but before he did, he paused and looked back at Bayo. "Just be careful, sir," he said quietly. "I've seen how she's been acting, and I don't think you fully understand what's going on." Bayo watched as Chitsi left the room, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The events of the night were starting to feel like a whirlwind. First, his attraction to Tigga, then Chitsi's warning about her behavior. His mind was spinning, trying to piece everything together. He sat back down on the bed, his hands clasped together. He couldn't deny it anymore. There was something about Tigga that was making him feel uneasy. Was she really involved in something dangerous, as Chitsi suggested? Or was he just letting his emotions get the best of him? The more he thought about it, the more questions piled up. Why was Tigga acting the way she did? What did she want from him? And more importantly, why did he feel like there was a connection between them, one that was impossible to ignore? As Bayo lay back on the bed, his mind was racing. He was married to Amina, and yet here he was, caught in the middle of something he couldn't explain. He had always been a man of control, someone who knew how to handle business, but now he felt out of his depth. In the silence of the night, Bayo's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. He sat up again, his heart racing. Who could it be now? "Come in," he called, his voice a little unsteady. The door opened slowly, and there, standing in the doorway, was Tigga. Bayo's heart skipped a beat as he saw Tigga standing in the doorway. The woman who had been on his mind for days. The woman who had stirred emotions in him that he couldn't quite understand. His mind raced as he tried to compose himself, but his body betrayed him. His pulse quickened, and for a moment, he found himself frozen, staring at her. Tigga was standing there, her usual maid uniform replaced by a simple white dress that accentuated her figure. Her braided hair fell neatly around her shoulders, and her deep brown eyes locked with his. She seemed calm, almost serene, but there was something in the way she stood, something that made Bayo's stomach tighten. "Sir, can I speak with you for a moment?" Tigga asked, her voice soft but clear. Bayo cleared his throat, trying to act normal despite the confusion and tension swirling inside him. He nodded, gesturing for her to come in. "Of course, Tigga. Come in," he said, his voice steady, though his mind was far from it. Tigga walked into the room slowly, her steps measured. She closed the door behind her, and for a brief moment, there was silence. The air in the room felt thick, and Bayo couldn't help but notice how close she was standing to him now. He could feel the heat of her presence, the way her scent lingered in the air. It made his heart race again. "I just wanted to apologize, sir," Tigga said, her voice low but sincere. "I didn't mean to make things awkward the other night. I wasn't trying to cross any boundaries." Bayo blinked, surprised by the sudden apology. He had expected her to confront him, to say something else entirely. But this felt different. He hadn't expected her to be so open, so direct. "Tigga, it's all right," Bayo said, though his mind was still whirling. "It's just that things have been a bit complicated lately." Tigga looked down for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost hesitant. "I know this isn't easy, sir, but I've been thinking a lot about everything, about how things are between us." Bayo's heart skipped a beat again. Was she talking about what had happened in the study? Was she aware of the feelings he had been trying to suppress? He wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension, but the words wouldn't come. He was trapped in the moment, his thoughts racing. "I can see it in your eyes," Tigga continued, looking up at him. "You've been distant and I don't want to make things harder for you. But I need to be honest with you." Bayo swallowed hard, his throat dry. He could feel the weight of her gaze on him, and it was as if everything around them had disappeared. It was just the two of them in that moment. "What do you mean?" Bayo finally managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Tigga took a deep breath before speaking again. I can't stop thinking about you, sir. I know it's wrong. I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I can't help it. There's something about you that draws me in, something that I can't ignore." Bayo's breath caught in his throat. The room seemed to close in on him as Tigga's words hung in the air. Was this really happening? Was she really confessing her feelings for him? He wanted to respond, to tell her that this was a mistake, that she couldn't feel that way about him. He was married to Amina. He had made a commitment to her, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he found himself staring at Tigga, his body betraying him as his heart raced. Tigga took a step closer, her face just inches from his. "I don't want to complicate things for you, sir," she said softly, "but I couldn't keep pretending like everything was normal when I felt this way." Bayo's mind was spinning, his heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to push her away, to tell her to stop, but a part of him, the part that had been longing for something more, couldn't bring himself to do it. He reached out, his hand trembling as it hovered in the air between them. "Tigga, this isn't right," he said, his voice low. "I'm married. I love Amina." Tigga's eyes darkened for a moment, and Bayo felt a pang of guilt pierce his chest. He had no idea what was happening between them, but he knew one thing. He was walking a dangerous line. "I know, sir," Tigga whispered, "but that doesn't change how I feel." Bayo's breath hitched as Tigga's hand slowly moved to rest on his. For a moment he was paralyzed, caught in the web of emotions that he couldn't explain. Was this really happening? Was he really considering what he was considering? Just as Bayo was about to speak, the sound of a door opening in the distance startled both of them. They quickly pulled away from each other, their faces flushed with shock and guilt. The door to Bayo's study had opened, and in the doorway stood Amina, her face a mixture of confusion and concern. "Bayo?" Amina's voice was hesitant, filled with uncertainty. "What's going on?" Bayo's heart sank as he turned to face his wife. The guilt that had been simmering inside him exploded, and he knew that everything was about to change. Amina had seen them. She had seen the way they had been standing so close, the way Tigga's hand had touched his. Amina's eyes flickered from Bayo to Tigga, and in that moment, everything that had been left unsaid hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Bayo opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The room was silent, save for the soft hum of the air conditioner. Bayo stood frozen, unable to speak as he watched Amina's eyes flicker from him to Tigga, her expression a mix of confusion, hurt, and something darker. His heart raced in his chest, the guilt suffocating him as he tried to process what was happening. Amina didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, her arms crossed, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her face was pale, and the faintest hint of tears threatened to spill from her eyes. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Bayo could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him, his stomach sinking lower with every passing second. Tigga, standing a few feet away, was equally silent. She shifted uncomfortably on her feet, her eyes flickering between Bayo and Amina. Her presence felt like an intrusion, and yet, Bayo couldn't seem to make her leave. His body felt heavy, the words he needed to say stuck in his throat. Amina cleared her throat, finally breaking the silence. "Bayo, what is this?" Her voice was shaky, but there was an unmistakable edge of anger in her words. Bayo's mind raced. He had to explain. He had to do something. But what could he say? How could he explain the way Tigga had made him feel? How could he explain the deep conflict he was feeling inside without destroying everything he had with Amina? "Amina, Bayo began, but Amina quickly held up her hand, stopping him. "No," she said, her voice sharp now. "I want to hear it from you. What is going on between you and her?" She nodded toward Tigga, her eyes cold. "Is this what it looks like? Are you having an affair with my maid?" The words stung. Bayo felt the weight of them like a slap to the face. He wasn't having an affair. Not exactly. But there was something between him and Tigga, something he couldn't explain. He had been trying to fight it, trying to keep his distance, but it had been impossible. He was ashamed of himself, but more than that, he was terrified of what this meant for his marriage. "No, Amina. It's not what you think," Bayo said, his voice trembling with emotion. It's complicated. Tigga and I." "Tigga and you what?" Amina interrupted, her voice rising. "What could be so complicated that you can't even be honest with me?" Tigga took a small step back, realizing the weight of the situation, but Bayo could see the hurt in her eyes. She hadn't meant for things to go this far. She had only been trying to find a way to get closer to him, to feel noticed. And now everything was falling apart. Amina's gaze softened slightly, her lips trembling. "Bayo, I thought I knew you. I thought we had something real, something strong. But this feels like a betrayal." Bayo stepped forward, reaching out to her. But Amina immediately took a step back, her eyes wide with hurt and disbelief. "Amina, please," Bayo pleaded. "It's not like that. I never wanted this to happen. I love you. I've always loved you." Amina shook her head slowly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "If you loved me, you wouldn't be standing here, looking at me like that. You wouldn't be so lost in someone else. You wouldn't be looking at your maid like she's something more than just an employee." She wiped her eyes quickly, her voice cracking. "I trusted you, Bayo, and you've betrayed that trust. You've betrayed me." The words hit Bayo like a punch to the gut. He had never seen Amina like this before. Her strength, her warmth, her trust. Everything had been shattered in an instant, and it was his fault. He looked over at Tigga, who stood silently, her face a mixture of regret and guilt. She knew that this was the moment everything would change. She had never intended for it to get this far, but now it had, and there was no going back. Amina's voice broke through his thoughts again. "I need space, Bayo. I need time to think about everything. I need to figure out what this all means." She looked at Tigga one last time, her eyes hard. "You need to leave. Now." Tigga hesitated for a moment, glancing at Bayo, but he didn't know what to say. His heart was heavy with guilt, and all he could do was watch as she turned and walked out of the room, closing the door behind her softly. Bayo stood there, unable to move, his thoughts a whirlwind. What had he done? How had he let things get this far? Amina sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking in her lap. She looked up at Bayo, her expression a mix of pain and disbelief. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Bayo," she whispered. "How could you let this happen?" Bayo wanted to explain, to tell her the truth, but he didn't know where to start. His heart ached for Amina, for the woman he had promised to love and protect. And yet, the more he thought about Tigga, the more he realized that there was something about her that he couldn't ignore. "Amina, please," Bayo said again, his voice breaking. "I don't know what happened. I didn't mean to hurt you. I love you. I love you more than anything." Amina didn't respond. She just looked at him, her eyes filled with tears, her expression broken. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Bayo didn't know how to fix this. He didn't know how to undo the damage that had been done. But one thing was clear. His world was falling apart, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The days that followed were some of the hardest Bayo had ever faced. He had spent his entire life building his business empire, making deals, and ensuring everything was perfect. But now nothing felt right. The one thing that mattered most to him, his marriage to Amina, was unraveling before his eyes. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. Amina had been distant ever since that night. She had retreated to her room, only speaking to him when absolutely necessary. The warmth that had once filled their home was now replaced by a cold silence. Every time Bayo tried to talk to her, to apologize, to make things right, she shut him out. It was like he was a stranger to her, and the more he tried to get through to her, the more she pulled away. Bayo couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. All he could think about was how badly he had messed things up. He had never wanted to hurt Amina. She was the love of his life. But the way Tigga had made him feel, It was something he hadn't experienced in years. His attraction to her, the way she had made him feel alive again, it was something he couldn't ignore. But now, Tigga was nowhere to be found. After Amina had demanded that she leave, Tigga had disappeared without a trace. Bayo tried to find her, tried to reach out, but she had cut all communication. It was as if she had vanished from his life completely. The guilt that weighed on him was unbearable. He knew he had made a huge mistake. He had let his emotions get the best of him, and now he was paying the price. He couldn't stop thinking about the look on Amina's face when she had caught him with Tigga. The hurt, the confusion, the betrayal. It was all there, written in her eyes. But as much as he regretted what had happened, there was still a part of him that couldn't shake the feelings he had for Tigga. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face. Every time he walked through the house, he expected to see her, but she was gone. One evening, after dinner, Bayo sat alone in the living room, staring blankly at the wall. The soft lighting from the chandelier above cast long shadows across the room, making everything feel more somber than usual. He had tried calling Amina several times, but she hadn't answered. He couldn't take it anymore. He needed to fix this. He needed to talk to her, to tell her the truth, no matter how hard it would be. He stood up and walked to the door of their bedroom. He could hear Amina moving around inside, but when he knocked, there was no response. He knocked again, this time a little louder, and finally, he heard a soft voice from the other side. "What do you want, Bayo?" Amina's voice was tired, defeated, cut through him like a knife. "Amina, please," he said, his voice shaking. "We need to talk. I need to explain." There was a long pause before Amina spoke again. "I don't think there's anything left to say, Bayo." Her words hit him harder than he expected. It was like she had already made up her mind, like she had already decided that their marriage was over. But Bayo wasn't ready to give up. He couldn't lose her. Not like this. Not after everything they had been through together. "Amina, please," he pleaded, his voice desperate. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I love you. I swear I do. This thing with Tigga, it was a mistake. I was confused. But you mean everything to me. Please, just give me a chance to fix this." Amina didn't respond immediately. Bayo could hear her moving around inside the room, the sound of her footsteps soft on the floor. He waited, hoping she would say something, anything. But the silence stretched on, leaving him feeling more helpless than ever. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Amina spoke. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Bayo. You've broken my trust. And trust, once broken, is hard to repair." Bayo's heart sank at her words. He knew she was right. He had shattered the one thing that had kept them together. But he wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. "Amina, please," he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't imagine my life without you. I've made mistakes, but I'll spend the rest of my life making it right if you'll just give me the chance." There was another long pause, and for a moment, Bayo thought she might just say goodbye. But then, he heard the door unlock. Amina slowly opened it, her face pale, her eyes tired. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Come in, Bayo," she said quietly, stepping aside to let him in. Bayo's heart leapt in his chest. He couldn't believe it. She was giving him a chance. He stepped into the room, his heart pounding. Amina sat down on the edge of the bed, and Bayo followed, sitting beside her. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The tension between them was thick, and Bayo didn't know where to start. But he knew he had to be honest. He had to tell her everything. "Amina, I swear, I never meant for any of this to happen," Bayo began. "Tigga, she made me feel things I hadn't felt in a long time. But that doesn't mean I love you any less. I've always loved you, and I always will." Amina looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "But why, Bayo? Why did you let it go this far? Why couldn't you just come to me?" Bayo's throat tightened as he tried to find the right words. "I don't know," he said finally. "I was weak. I was confused. And I didn't want to hurt you. But I did. And I'm so sorry." Amina's tears fell freely now, her shoulders shaking as she cried. Bayo reached for her hand, gently squeezing it, hoping she could feel the sincerity in his touch. He didn't know if it would be enough, but he had to try. "I'll do anything, Amina," he said softly. "Anything to make it right." The following days were a blur for Bayo. Amina had agreed to give him a chance, but it wasn't the easy forgiveness he had hoped for. It was a fragile truce, built on the thin threads of guilt, sorrow, and the desperate desire to repair something broken. Amina was still distant, her emotions like a storm waiting to unleash. She allowed him to be around, but the warmth of their relationship had been replaced by cold formality. Every word between them felt measured, every glance calculated. There was no more laughter, no more joy, just silence and awkwardness. Bayo did everything he could to prove his commitment. He tried to make up for the time he had spent neglecting her, showering her with gifts, bringing her flowers and making grand gestures. But none of it seemed to reach her. She accepted his offerings with a polite smile, but it was as if she was just going through the motions. She was no longer the woman he had married. He could feel it, and it was breaking his heart. Every day he would wake up, hoping for a small breakthrough, hoping that today would be the day Amina would open up and let him back into her heart. But each night, he went to bed feeling just as lonely as before. One evening, as he sat in his office, the phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello," Bayo said, his voice tired but curious. "Mr. Bayo, it's Tigga," came the voice on the other end. Bayo's heart skipped a beat at the sound of her name. He hadn't heard from her since that night. He had tried to find her, but all his efforts had been in vain. It was as if she had disappeared without a trace. Hearing her voice now, after everything that had happened, brought a rush of conflicting emotions. "Tigga," Bayo said, his voice tight, "where have you been? I've been trying to reach you." "I know," Tigga replied, her voice soft. "I'm sorry for disappearing like that. I needed some time to think. Things have been complicated, and I didn't want to make anything worse." Bayo's chest tightened as he listened to her. His thoughts were a whirlwind. He didn't know what to feel. Part of him was angry for the way things had ended, but another part of him, the part that had been longing for her, couldn't deny the desire to hear from her again. "I don't know what's going on, Tigga," Bayo said, his voice filled with frustration. "I never wanted to hurt Amina. I never wanted any of this. But now I'm stuck between what's right and what I feel, and it's tearing me apart." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Tigga spoke again, her voice lower now. "I know, Bayo. I understand. But you have to decide, you know? You can't keep living in two worlds. You have to choose what you want." Bayo felt the weight of her words. He knew she was right, but how could he choose between the woman he had promised to love and the woman who had stirred something deep inside of him? Tigga's presence had awakened desires he hadn't known he had. She had made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. But Amina was his wife, the woman who had stood by him when no one else had. I don't know what to do," Bayo admitted, his voice cracking. "I don't know what's right anymore." "I'll give you some space," Tigga said, her voice soft but firm. "But just remember, Bayo, you can't keep running away from the truth. You have to face it sooner or later." The line went silent for a moment, and then Tigga spoke again. "I'll be here when you're ready, but you have to be honest with yourself." Before Bayo could respond, she hung up. Bayo sat there, the phone still pressed to his ear, staring at the wall in front of him. His mind was spinning. Tigga had given him an ultimatum. She had made it clear that he couldn't keep living in this limbo, caught between his marriage and his feelings for her. He needed to make a choice. But how could he? How could he choose between two women who had both changed his life in such different ways? He dropped the phone onto the desk and leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. The weight of everything, his marriage, his attraction to Tigga, his guilt, was pressing down on him. He didn't know what the right answer was. He didn't know if he could fix what he had broken. Later that evening, as Bayo sat in the living room, Amina entered quietly, her eyes still heavy with the unspoken tension that had been between them for days. She walked past him without saying a word, And for the first time, Bayo didn't reach out to her. He let her go. He let her retreat into her silence. Amina didn't deserve this. She didn't deserve a husband who was torn between two women. She deserved someone who could be fully there for her, someone who could give her all the love she needed without hesitation or doubt. And yet, here Bayo was, struggling to choose between what was right and what he felt. He watched her as she walked into their bedroom, her back turned to him. She didn't look at him. She didn't even acknowledge his presence. Bayo felt the deep ache in his chest as he stared at her retreating figure. He wanted to fix this. He wanted to prove to Amina that he could be the man she needed him to be. But at the same time, his mind kept drifting back to Tigga. The pull he felt toward her, the desire that had stirred inside him, was still there. He couldn't ignore it, no matter how much he wanted to. Bayo closed his eyes and leaned back in the chair, the weight of the decision looming over him. How long could he keep running from the truth? The days that followed felt like an endless cycle for Bayo. His thoughts were consumed by Tigga and Amina, each one pulling him in a different direction. Every time he tried to talk to Amina, the conversation seemed to lead nowhere. She remained cold and distant, her eyes filled with a hurt that Bayo couldn't erase. And then there was Tigga. Her words lingered in his mind. "You have to decide, Bayo." It was a decision he couldn't make. His heart was torn in two, and the more he thought about it, the more confused he became. He loved Amina, but the feelings he had for Tigga were undeniable. It was as if something inside him was calling out for her, something he couldn't ignore. That evening, after another silent dinner with Amina, Bayo decided to take a walk. The night air was cool and soothing, and as he walked through the quiet streets, he tried to clear his mind. But no matter how hard he tried, his thoughts always returned to the same place. Just as he rounded the corner, he saw someone standing in the distance. It was Tigga. She was leaning against a streetlight, looking up at the stars, her silhouette bathed in the soft glow of the light. For a moment, Bayo stood frozen, his heart racing. She hadn't seen him yet. He could turn around and walk away, go back to Amina, try to fix things. But he didn't move. Tigga turned and their eyes met. "I thought I might see you here," she said softly, her voice carrying in the quiet night. Bayo swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Tigga, Before he could finish, Tigga took a step forward. "You don't have to say anything, Bayo. I know what you're going through. You don't have to choose right now." Bayo felt a wave of emotion flood over him. He wasn't ready to make a choice, but the pull toward her, the feelings he had for her, were stronger than ever. "I'm sorry, Tigga," Bayo said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm losing everything." Tigga reached out and gently placed her hand on his arm. "You're not losing anything," she said quietly. "You're just figuring it out. And when you're ready, you'll know what to do." Bayo's heart ached as he looked at her. He knew he had to make a choice, but in that moment he felt completely lost. Bayo stood in the quiet of the night, the weight of his emotions heavy on his chest. Tigga's words echoed in his mind. "When you're ready, you'll know what to do." He wasn't ready. He wasn't sure he ever would be. His heart was torn, and the confusion had become a constant companion. Amina hadn't spoken to him much over the past few days, and when she did, it was always polite, distant. It was clear that the trust they once shared had been shattered, and no matter how much he tried, he couldn't fix it. Tigga, on the other hand, had given him the space to decide, but her presence loomed large in his mind. Every time he saw her, every time she smiled at him, a part of him wondered what could have been if things had been different. But Bayo knew one thing. He couldn't live like this anymore. The guilt, the confusion, the constant battle in his heart. It was eating away at him. He needed to make a choice. The next day, after much contemplation, Bayo came to a decision. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't the one he wanted to make. But he knew it was the right one for now. He had to save his marriage. Bayo called Amina into the living room, his heart pounding in his chest. She walked in slowly, her eyes wary, her expression unreadable. "Amina," Bayo began, his voice steady, but filled with emotion. "I've made a decision. I want to work on our marriage. I know I've hurt you, but I promise I'll do everything to rebuild your trust. I want us to move forward, together." Amina's eyes softened, but she didn't speak right away. She stood there, looking at him as if weighing his words. Finally, she nodded slowly. "We'll take it one day at a time, Bayo," she said quietly. "I'm willing to try, but you'll have to prove it to me." Bayo felt a sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't the end, and it wasn't perfect, but it was a start. He had made the choice to stay to fix what he had broken, and that was enough for now. But as he watched Amina walk away, the thought of Tigga lingered in his mind. He had made a choice, but he couldn't help but wonder if he had truly made the right one. The days after Bayo's decision to focus on his marriage were filled with small, quiet steps toward healing. Amina was still distant, but there were moments, small, fleeting moments, where Bayo saw a glimpse of the woman he had fallen in love with. She would laugh softly at something he said, or they would share a quiet dinner in the evening. It wasn't much, but it was progress. Bayo knew it wasn't going to be easy, but he was determined to make it work. He continued to show Amina that he was committed to repairing the trust that had been broken, even if it meant taking things slow. However, despite the progress with Amina, there was still something gnawing at Bayo. His thoughts often wandered back to Tigga. He hadn't seen her since that night when she had given him the space to decide. She had respected his choice to focus on his marriage, but there was a part of him that couldn't let go of the feeling she had stirred in him. One afternoon, as Bayo was going through some business matters in his study, his phone buzzed on the desk. He picked it up and saw a message from an unknown number. "I've been thinking about you. I miss our talks." It was from Tigga. Bayo's heart skipped a beat. He stared at the message for a long time, his mind racing. He had made his choice, but the pull toward Tigga was still there. What did she want now? Did she want to continue where they had left off? Bayo put the phone down, his thoughts tangled. He knew he had to stay true to his commitment to Amina, but Tigga's message made him wonder if he was making the right decision. The choice he had made felt more complicated than ever. Bayo sat in his study, the phone still in his hand, the message from Tigga staring back at him. The decision that had seemed so clear just days ago now felt like an impossible burden. He had chosen Amina. He had committed to rebuilding their life together. Yet Tigga's message had awakened feelings he had thought were buried. It wasn't fair to either of them. As he stared at the screen, his mind raced. He couldn't ignore the pull of his past, but he also couldn't betray Amina again. He had promised her a fresh start. His heart was torn, caught between the love he had for his wife and the unresolved feelings for the woman who had shaken his world. Just as he was about to put the phone down, the door to his study opened. Amina stood there, her eyes locking onto his, a silent understanding in her gaze. She didn't speak at first. She simply walked over, her movements steady and deliberate. Bayo swallowed hard, his throat dry. Was this it? Had she come to confront him about the message? Was she finally done with him? But instead of asking about Tigga or the message, Amina sat down across from him. She looked at him, her eyes softening, a quiet sadness in them. "I know what you're going through," Amina said quietly. "I know you still think about her, Bayo." His breath caught in his throat. He hadn't expected her to acknowledge it, let alone speak about it so calmly. "Amina, Bayo started, but she held up her hand, stopping him. "I know, Bayo," she repeated, her voice gentle. "But I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to choose me, to choose us. No more secrets, no more lies. I don't need you to be perfect, but I need you to be honest with me. So, tell me, Bayo, do you still want me? Can we move forward?" For the first time in a long while, Bayo felt a sense of clarity. It wasn't about Tigga anymore. It was about Amina, the woman who had stood by him through everything, the woman who had given him everything. He put the phone down, his decision made. Slowly, he reached across the table, taking Amina's hand in his. "I choose you, Amina," Bayo said, his voice steady. "I choose us." Amina smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She squeezed his hand, the weight of their shared history and the possibility of a future hanging between them. As they sat there in silence, the weight of the past seemed to lift. There was still work to be done, but for the first time in a long time, Bayo felt like he was on the right path. And somewhere, in the distance, he knew Tigga would have to be a part of his past. The future, he realized, was where his heart truly belonged.